In today's video, we have several updates, including many factors going into the NHL's return to play, the hub cities, the latest testing on the COVID-19 virus. We've also got some trade rumors focusing on Vegas and Montreal. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of news topics to cover today. Let's kick things off with all the latest goings on involving the NHL return to play and all the negotiations going on right now between the NHL as well as the NHLPA. Now, obviously, we're really close apparently to getting the Hub City announcement. Not quite ready yet. I was hoping it maybe would be today, but NHL insiders are saying it could come as early as tomorrow. I know this morning they were saying it could come today, but we're not quite there yet. We're led to believe the leading contenders right now is Toronto and Vegas, with the East playing in Toronto and the West playing in Vegas, but we'll have to remain to be seen on that. The other cities, including Edmonton, Chicago, and Los Angeles, are not out of the running. They haven't been notified that they're not in contention anymore, so I guess we'll have to remain to be seen on that. But that is one of the many issues in negotiations taking place between the league and the Players Association. They're obviously trying to hammer out a extension on the CBA, which has 2 seasons left on it. As I mentioned before, we could be looking at 6 years of labor peace because they are discussing a 4-year CBA extension. Part of that is going to have many different negotiations as well. We're hearing that most likely the salary cap is going to remain flat for 2 years, and then in years 3 and 4, only small marginal increases, but could possibly be renegotiated depending on the hockey revenues between now and then. Of course, that could possibly change a little bit. They have a new US TV deal kicking in, Seattle expansion, but of course they've lost a lot of money during this NHL pause, so a lot of that money coming in will not really push them further ahead to be able to expand the cap here. So obviously that's a big part of it. Escrow's on the top of the list as well for players. We're hearing now that escrow could be capped for the next couple of years around 20%, and then likely going down after that for the remaining years of the CBA. Obviously another big issue too that has to be sorted out and relatively quick here is that July the 1st, which is only 2 days away, the NHL players have a ton of signing bonus money that needs to be paid out, or that's currently scheduled to be paid out. As we know, July 1st is the normal calendar day that signals the beginning of the following NHL season. So when it comes to contracts, they expire on June 30th. The following years kick in on July the 1st. And between all of the NHL teams, they have over $300 million in signing bonus money that would technically be due on July the 1st. Now, it is quite possible we could see an agreement reached between the league and the PA that date be pushed back. Obviously, the season's not over yet, so obviously right now players normally get that on July 1st, but free agency day usually kicks in, and we have signing bonus days for players already under contract who have it built in. So there's a lot of money for owners to be pumping out right now without really any revenues coming in. So that's a big factor. I mean, a lot of teams, depending on where they're at, some teams have a lot of signing bonus money, some have very little, some are kind of in the middle there, but that's a big problem. That's $300 million. Clearly that's something that's going to have to be negotiated in pronto here, likely going to have something on that by tomorrow, considering tomorrow is the day before all that money is due. Wouldn't be completely shocked if they do reach an agreement, at least right now, to have the date pushed out at least. And then from there, I guess we'll see. Obviously, some of that money could also be deferred. I know, obviously, when it comes to payment deferrals, like the players were talking about with their final paychecks back in April, essentially what that would mean is the big advantage would be that they could have a lower escrow amount taken out of it when it is paid out at a later date. That's at least the hope. And obviously, for that to happen, they need to get things back on track, get the league playing again, and get some revenue generated so that the owners can afford to do that. So obviously, if a date is reached to push that back, that really helps cash flow for owners. It doesn't really put money in players' pockets, but everything that they do to create, a healthier proposition here from a financial standpoint to keep the league, going and healthier is, I guess, good longer term term. So they're certainly seem to be working together quite closely and getting along on a lot of issues. So we'll have to see how they figure this part out. Part of the CBA and everything as well that they're negotiating has to be a new international hockey calendar of events. Obviously, the NHL players participate in a variety of things. And I know one of the big issues for players is being able to participate in the Olympics. But there was mention from Bob McKenzie earlier on Twitter that he had reason to believe that maybe that wasn't going to be in this new pact. So that would be quite surprising at this point if the players gave up that easily without, getting that included. I would think right now that the players kind of hold a lot of leverage because they're the ones putting themselves more at risk to go back and play, and that they might have used that as an advantage to get the Olympics put back in to the agreement here. But I guess will remain to be seen. I know that's something that is being discussed, and it's important to some people at least. Obviously, when it comes to the PA as a whole, though, I'm not sure exactly what kind of percentage they would get to support that, because clearly it's only the top players that go. But I think many other players, even if they know they're not good enough to make their international teams for their countries, that they recognize how good it is for the game overall, and what's good for the game essentially is good for them. So I guess we'll see how that issue hammers out as well. The NHL did finally announce some more details on COVID-19 testing and test results. We hadn't had any updates on that in some time. They've had several hundred tests completed on players that have returned for Phase 2. They have had 15 more positive tests, and they're aware of 11 other positive tests for players that have not yet reported for Phase 2. So these are players that are likely in their home cities or countries and have been tested for other reasons. They're likely working out on their own or in other groups, but they're not officially part of the Phase 2 return to play, and then they have a positive test. So that's a fairly big number, but I guess one thing to keep in mind here is, are the Phase 3 and 4 protocols going to be tight enough and secure enough to keep those numbers down once they start playing? Because, obviously if they start having outbreaks once they reach those phases, then it's going to be really difficult to play and continue to get this season completed. For the most part, are living in their, their communities where they're at, whether it be in their NHL city or their home city, and they're, for the most part, they're socializing, they're out doing everyday things. So clearly, in some places, especially, you see some hot spots around the United States, most predominantly here. That creates a problem for them to be, at risk to get infected. So clearly, we'll have to see. But as the test number grows and the positive cases grow, it certainly does raise some question marks, and you can't help but wonder what that means for the long-term viability of this return-to-play plan. So with all that said, I fully suspect there to be all kinds of news here in the next couple of days regarding all of this information. Hub City, CBA, Phase 3, Phase 4, protocols, all that stuff likely coming soon. So be prepared for a very busy week. Normally July 1st, which I said is only 2 days away, would be very busy when it comes to free agency. Usually we see a few trades and some, lots of transactions and activity. Of course, we're not going to get that this year, but it very well could be a very news cycle. It very well could still be a very busy news cycle type of time frame, though, with all this stuff on the horizon and being voted on and trying to be squared away here for the long-term future of the league and its return-to-play plan. Now, as I mentioned as well, we also want to take a look at some NHL offseason free agent and trade rumors, focusing on Vegas and Montreal. So let's kick things off here with the Vegas Golden Knights. I came across an article on The Score talking about the possibility of the Vegas Golden Knights being able to retain Robin Lehner as a goaltender and then possibly look at trading Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, when the Vegas Golden Knights acquired Lehner at the deadline, certainly raised a lot of eyebrows and caught a lot of people off guard, myself included. Wasn't shocked that Lehner was traded, but I was quite surprised at where he ended up. Clearly, he's one of the better goaltenders around the NHL. Numbers were down a little bit this year, but he was also playing on a not great Chicago team in front of him. Obviously, previously with the Islanders, he put up much better numbers because they had a really solid defensive team in front of him that did play a role. But he also had back-to-back solid years, in my opinion, after being able to come back to the NHL, remain clean and sober, and go through all the battles that he's gone through. He's been a remarkable comeback story, and certainly one of the better goaltenders in the NHL. So obviously with Fleury's case in Vegas, they have some cap issues. Like many teams, especially with everything I just said here, the cap is expected to remain flat for 2 years and then only have a marginal small increase in year 3 and 4. So in 4 years' time, we could only go from 81.5 to maybe 82 to 83 million. For a lot of NHL teams that were projecting steady increases year after year after year when they were doing all these other contracts, that is going to pose a major major problem, and some of these teams are going to be in serious cap problems and likely going to end up having some players maybe be bought out, or when it comes to the expansion draft, maybe hoping that Seattle takes a big ticket contract off their books or whatnot, but it's going to cause a lot of issues for many teams. That's fair to say for sure. Vegas being one of them because they're up against the cap pretty tight. And Marc-Andre Fleury has 2 more years at $7 million. Now, of course, he was taken in the expansion draft from the Penguins. It was immediately the face of the franchise. They had a historical run in their first inaugural season, going all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, and unfortunately losing to Washington on home ice for the Stanley Cup. But ultimately, they had a tremendous year, and in my opinion, Fleury was their most valuable player. And of course, they went through a lot of goaltender issues that year. His number of games played in a regular season were down a bit. Unfortunate for him that he had to go through these injuries, but it did cause him to be more rested as the season went on and into the playoffs. And really, ever since, every year, his numbers have gotten worse year after year after year for 2 consecutive years after that initial season. His save percentage went from .927 down to .913, then down to .905. Then after the first year, his goals against went from 2.24 to 2.5, then up to .277. So really, the Vegas team in front of him hasn't really changed that drastically. So to me, Fleury's play just has not been quite as good. He is taking some steps back. He's 35 years old. He will be 36 when the following season gets underway because he turns 36 in the fall. So with the NHL season likely not getting started until December, January, around there, he will already be 36 when that next year starts and kicks in. For 2 years left at $7 million. I would imagine that Robin Lehner can be signed for less money and possibly on a mid-range term. I mean, I know he's looking for a longer-term commitment after playing on consecutive one-year deals, and obviously he deserves that and he's earned it. But how much money and how much term is it going to take to sign him? Difficult to say, but I think with everything going on in the NHL, with the pause, the pandemic, and everything, the whole free agent crop has certainly changed a lot just from that standpoint alone. And some of these players might not get the term and money that they were originally hoping for, and Lehner is likely one of them. And I think there's a lot of great goaltenders who could potentially be free agents this offseason, and clearly, they might not get the big-time money. Teams are going to be hesitant to be handing out those super long-term contracts. So could Vegas sign Robin Lehner, maybe even a mid-range deal, 3 to 4 years, $5 to $6 million? It's certainly a possibility. I think that's something that he would go for. They could save a little bit of money on their cap, even if it's only $1.5 million. It's every little bit helps at this point, and it gets them a goaltender. And Robin Lehner, who's been outperforming Fleury over the past 2 years, and gets them a substantially younger goaltender. There's a 7-year age gap between Fleury and Lehner, and with Vegas not really having a clear-cut goaltender of the future, that might be a tremendous move for them to get their long-term goalie plans in place and save some money on the cap. I know from a fan perspective, it would be sad to see Fleury go. He's had a great run there, but ultimately this is a business. Vegas has proven here that they're not afraid to make the tough decisions. We already saw them fire Gerard Gallant in a situation where they seemed somewhat unmanageable because the team hadn't been doing all that poorly. But George McPhee and Kelly McCrimmon are not afraid to make those tough choices if it means moving their team forward here, and I could see that happening. Now, Fleury could complicate things because he does have a modified no trade. There's a 10-team list that he can block, but that still gives them 21 teams to talk to. There is clearly a decent amount of teams that are desperately looking for goaltending. I'm not sure who would be on his no list because I don't know how he feels about everything like that, but clearly there'd be a lot of parameters to talk to about possibly moving him. That could even become maybe a draft day trade perhaps as we get closer to next season. But I would not be shocked, and this article makes a lot of valid points, that Fleury could be traded. Lehner might be the goalie of the future in Vegas to help them save some cap and get younger all at the same time. So let me know what your thoughts are on the possibility of that happening down below in the comment section. Now, also here, as I mentioned, I want to talk about the Montreal Canadiens a little bit and focus on Max Domi. Now, with Domi's case, we're looking more of this from a free agent rumor perspective, not necessarily a trade rumor. I know we've talked about the possibility before about Domi being moved, but that's not really what's on the agenda here today. We have some recent articles and news talking about what it might take to sign Max Domi, because at this point, I'm not completely convinced that Marc Bergevin would trade him. I think it's really going to boil down to what the offer coming back would be. I think Bergevin has to consider all small moves, but I do expect Bergevin to be busy, especially when we hit the NHL draft. They've got a ton of draft picks, they've got a ton of cap space, and they do have some players with questionable futures, and clearly Bergevin has a few glaring needs that addressed on this team, including likely a left shot defenseman, and they could certainly use another scoring forward. Now, of course, if they lose to Pittsburgh, they're going to go in the draft lottery for first overall. I know when we conducted the mock draft here the other day, after the draft lottery was completed, they won the lottery that I completed. I know it would be a tremendous story. Looking around the NHL through social media and different polls I've seen, it seems like a lot of people seem to think that the Habs probably deserve Lafreniere more than most teams, at least, that are going into this qualifying round. All the teams that are playing in it, they were certainly near the bottom of the list when it comes to the standings. And obviously it'd be a great story from the fact that he's a French Canadian going to the team that was supposed to host the draft. I said all along from the time way back, long before any of the pandemic and pause happened, that Montreal's hosting the draft. The consensus number one pick overall is a French Canadian, and I fully expected Bergevin to be very busy and be making some big, drastic, bold moves to make a big splash at the draft. And they might be able to do that even though they're technically not going to be hosting it in their arena, based on the fact, like I said, that they could end up winning this lottery. It would be absolutely huge. So obviously, if he can win that lottery and they get Lafreniere, that's going to change a lot for Montreal. That's going to give them that top scoring forward that they so desperately are looking for. They give them that star power, the offensive impact, and they may not have to do much in a way when it comes to free agency or trades to really bolster that forward group. They could probably focus more on some defensive improvements. As I mentioned before, maybe acquiring either through free agency or trade a really solid, maybe second or first pair left shot defenseman. And then from there, they should be in pretty good shape after that because they have a lot of other great pieces in the prospect pool. They kind of fill in the other spots. We've got word that Jesperi Kotkaniemi is coming back to play for the playoffs, and he's expected to be in the lineup. So we'll see how he can do, if he can take some steps forward. That would be big. But bringing it all back to Max Domi's contract here, the consensus is that it's probably best for the player and the team if they do a one-year contract. He's a restricted free agent with arbitration eligibility, which means that if they can't come to an agreement on their own, it's going to go to an arbitrator, likely going to end up in a one-year deal anyways. And clearly Domi's numbers were down, so that's not good for him. He's not in a great strength in negotiations right now from that standpoint. Obviously, with everything going on, and like we've already discussed here, from a financial standpoint with the league, it's not great from the team's perspective. Even though they have the cap space, they're not going to want to be handing out long-term big money contracts. So I'd be quite surprised if they went down that road. If they do a one-year deal, he's still a restricted free agent again next year. Gives them an opportunity for him to reprove himself. Gives the team more cap flexibility as well. And then going to go from there and reevaluate after another season. And I expect Bergevin to be busy. We have guys like Jonathan Drouin as well as Thomas Tatar, whose futures I think are certainly questionable in Montreal. Not to say they're for sure going to be moved, but I do think it's a possibility, especially if they end up with Lafreniere. Then clearly that's going to be a big game changer for Bergevin. It's going to change a lot. So I guess we'll have to see what happens. But let me know what your thoughts are on the likelihood of Domi taking a one-year deal, stay in Montreal, likely giving the team flexibility. We'll see some other moves out of Bergevin and the Habs and kind of reevaluate with things on his future, likely after one more year. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.